Hey y'all, welcome back to the show. It's your boy Jay Henhan, and I'm back with another episode of How to Kill a Sacred Cow. Tonight on the podcast, we have returning once again Troy McLachlan, author of The Saturn Death Cult, and this is part 4 in the series that we've been chipping away at over the past couple of months. He's become one of my favorite recurring guests, and we tonight are talking about MK Ultra. We're talking about the history, we're talking about serial killers and how that ties in with intelligence organization operations, and we're talking about music and how that also ties in with all that stuff. It's a super fascinating conversation, and I'm very happy to present him to you once again. If anybody would like to help out the show, you can actually go to howtokillasacredcow.com, and on the homepage there, I have a banner at the bottom in which you can subscribe to Audible, which is Amazon's audiobook feature. It's incredible. I use it all the time. Helps the show out if you subscribe through that link. Helps me get a little bit of a commission. And also, you can go into the library section on the website, and you can buy any one of the incredible books of any of the authors that I've had on the program. I have them all listed out there. For example, our boy Conspiracy Kyle has just put out a new book, and it is friggin' awesome, and you can go and get it through that link, and it helps me out. But more than that, it helps him out. And that's what we're all about over here at How to Kill a Sacred Cow. We are trying to help everybody get off the ground and get their stuff out there, and we're trying to build a robust and beautiful community. Now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Troy McLachlan. Hello everybody, welcome back to the show. I have with me again for a part 4, Troy McLachlan. Troy, how you doing tonight?
Very good. Thanks for having me back.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, man. You've definitely become one of my favorite recurring people that I've had on the show. And so I kind of just wanted to pretty much pick up where we left off. We started talking about all kinds of crazy stuff, breakaway civilizations, Nazis, all that stuff. So I figured we'll pick up the thread on the MK Ultra that we kind of left by the wayside, the MK Ultra subject, and kind of talk about like how this fits into the greater narrative of what you speak about in your book, the Saturn Death Cult, and how that relates to what we're seeing today with all this crazy current event stuff that we could get into if we get there. But I like spending my time in history because, you know, the present isn't so great sometimes. But so Troy, where would you kind of like to go in with the MK Ultra subject?
Well, I think we can sort of springboard from the fact, I believe anyway, that MK Ultra was a natural progression of the influence of all those Nazis that were pushed over to America under Operation Paperclip. The idea of traumatizing people in order to program them was very much a part of the Nazi philosophy during the time that Adolf Hitler ran things in Germany. And much of that research looking into the idea of brainwashing, as it would later be called, and so on, was pioneered by the German scientists, many of which then went on to inform the CIA, the newly created CIA's attempts at exactly that sort of thing. What I learned about MK Ultra and why I include it in the Saturn Death Cult side of thing, and also in relation to the Nazi idea, is that one of the keys to programming people is you've got to traumatize them to a point where you can rebuild their personality, or basically give them a split personality, not necessarily schizophrenia, but this idea of multiple personalities, or as they call it now, dissociated personality disorder. And the way this is done is through extreme trauma. And I think it was the guy, the husband of Candy Jones, the famous woman who claimed to be an MK Ultra, guinea pig right at the beginning, and she had her sort of brainwashing adventures in the Second World War and after that, and such. What he sort of added to the discussion was the idea that you torture and harm and traumatize people to be able to put information in, not to get information out. In other words, it's not an interrogation technique for getting information. Somebody under great trauma will tell you anything you want to know as such. But the idea is that you're going to change that person into somebody who can be programmed to do what you want them to do. And when you understand that at a personal level, and this idea of scalable concepts, that's, electric universe we talked about earlier and so on, they're all scalable concepts. You can do something at lab level and it can be recreated at galactic level in terms of how it works. Well, it's the same thing with traumatizing people. You can traumatize a person, you can traumatize a family, you can traumatize an extended family, a tribe, up to a nation. You can traumatize an entire planet if you can, if you have the resources to do so. And in so doing, you can program them. And so MK Ultra becomes this kind of smaller scalable version of what I am saying happened to society as a whole as a result of ancient planetary catastrophes. Doomsday was the great trauma of the human race. The advent that saw the dislodging of Saturn from its position above the Earth, and the move into a world of scarcity where Saturn no longer glowed as our original sun. And down through the ages, that trauma has been exploited through trigger mechanisms based on archetypes that were created by this trauma. Doomsday trauma, the archetype of the authority of Saturn, the Saturn god head, and his position as the capricious authority that has control over life or death of you. Well, this is what you program into the individual at an MK Ultra level. Practical wise, you also produce what is a fantastic spy. The idea was that, as far as I understand it, once you've traumatized somebody into two personalities, they can act as a spy, because once you trigger them into the personality that does not know the message, the personality that does not know the message can never be tortured enough to get that message out unless you have the trigger word or the trigger sequence to get back to the other personality that did hear the message. So this was, a way of couriering ideas and so on. But I think its premise is that what we can see is there is a definite attempt to use trauma as a way of controlling people, and that's the common denominator. Whether it's this hugely scalable version of a doomsday event, wars, world wars, right down to the individual being electroshock treated, to children being traumatized by satanic imagery, occult ritual, that kind of stuff. The children are the easiest victims to get at. They're the most susceptible, particularly at about 3 years of age. And this is what we hear, takes place. But MK Ultra is just a symptom of what I call this culture, the Saturn Death Cult culture, where they're always looking for new ways to control. And really, I argue that we're moving towards the ultimate MK Ultra trauma event, which is a worldwide culling, a way of destroying this world as we know it, to replace it with this new golden age that is really the preserve of man-made technology instead of the ancient god Saturn. That's something that I hope people will understand from the book, that that's how this culture operates. It operates towards this idea of a new golden age, but a man-made golden age, where technology provides all the answers, and it is exclusive to an elite few.
It's really fascinating too to see the history of MK Ultra also, right? Because MK Ultra, with regards to the CIA, is an outgrowth of something called Project Artichoke. Artichoke was this program that was, it was the CIA was torturing prisoners, I think it was of the Korean War, and they were seeing how far the limits of the human body were. Like, they would put someone in extreme cold and see how long it took them to die. They would put people in extreme heat and see how long it took people to die, how much air they could put in their lungs before their lungs exploded, type of thing. And so it's it's crazy because the same people that were involved in those programs shifted to MK Ultra when they wanted to see if they could wipe the mind and put anything in there just to see what they could do. And, some parts of the program, they were concerned with making that kind of Manchurian candidate. But I think what they figured out, and it was something that the Nazis were working on and why the paperclip Nazis that had come over were perfect for this program, was because they started realizing the subtlety that could be employed with something like MK Ultra, where maybe they didn't need to entirely wipe somebody's mind, and that maybe it could work on a more subtle level, more suggestive, like in how propaganda is effective. And there was this psychologist who had he had lodged FOIA requests with the American government, and he actually, what they tried to do was kind of like frustrate him, so they sent him a whole bunch of what they believed to be useless paperwork. But what he gleaned from the paperwork was that MK Ultra, instead of being shut down, was basically cut up into a million different programs, and he found them all over the place. He found them in the media, he found them in advertising companies and all kinds of different applications, education and all this stuff. And so just to see how widespread it was is like, and this always happens with government programs. You think it's going to shut down, but it actually splinters, and they use that. It's, you don't just learn something and go, oh, well, that was a good time, and I'll figure that out. So what do you think that means for today? What do you think they learned in MK Ultra? How do you think it's being applied today?
Well, I think the most poignant thing that they learned, for most people to grasp it, it's on the personal level. You see somebody who's a victim of it, you hear their story of the horrors that they've been subjected to, and that makes it easy to understand. But I think MK Ultra is inextricably linked with a thing called Operation Phoenix, which was a Vietnam era campaign of terror that America launched against suspected Vietnamese sympathizers, not Vietnamese sympathizers, but communist sympathizers in the South Vietnamese populace and so on. And what they learned from MK Ultra is that trauma works as a way of, indoctrinating people, moving people towards an idea that you want. But ultimately, we know how Vietnam ended up. And for me, the most interesting thing is it seems that Operation Phoenix came back to America in the form of this sudden, massive, this explosion of serial murder that started to rear its head in America from about 1968 onwards. Really, coming into the public consciousness with people like Charles Manson, these types of killers. Dave McGowan is a guy who wrote a book called Program to Kill. He also looked at the whole hippie phenomenon and how that was controlled out of Laurel Canyon during the 60s with various sorts of bands and so on. But in Program to Kill, Dave McGowan, really pushed the question of much of the serial killing of the 1970s and so on was organized. It was not necessarily the work of lone lunatics. Those lone lunatics were programmed, groomed, and set about and supported by groups of people coming out of the American military intelligence, CIA, if you want, but certainly in those higher echelons of government. And it was really the application of the Phoenix program that in America that we were seeing with the rise of the serial killer phenomenon. And again, that's your scalable idea of what they were studying in MK Ultra could be scaled up to groups of people, to cities of people, to nations of people. And I think this is the frightening thing about MK Ultra, that as bad as it is in terms of how it's made victims of individuals, the lessons learned there were scalable. You could do the same thing to entire nations of people. And it's a terrifying thought that much of that serial, McGowan, I can't remember if he does say in his book or not, but it may be as high as 20 to 30% of serial killers. You can detect that they were part of an organized, regimen. They were part of something organized behind them, whether it was John Wayne Gacy, Henry Lee Lucas, these old serial killers from the 70s and the 80s. So many of them have got links to either the prison programs where MK Ultra was operational, was being operated in a lot of the prison program, or they have links to American military intelligence. And it's the same with serial killers in Russia, same with serial killers in Britain. There seems to be this link into the intelligence agencies, not the intelligence agencies, but the American military intelligence groups. And that points to the idea that, this is a strategy. It's not an aberration. It's a strategy in place designed to traumatize people into a way of thinking that allows government to impose ever greater restrictive controls on people. It had its day. We hardly blink now at news of a new serial killer and so on. The other day, I learned about a guy, I can't remember his name, is Sean Great, serial killer who was sort of caught and he was operating in the 2000s. This guy is as bad as anybody, John Wayne Gacy or any of these other guys that Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer and so on. But he's not the media superstar those guys became. So we're living in an age now where that trauma is no longer sufficient to manipulate society into areas, but it did its job. There's a lot of policing laws that have been initiated based on we'll keep you safe from the boogeyman serial killer.
And here's an interesting fold to this idea of MK Ultra is that, so what you're saying and like what Dave McGowan was saying is that these serial killers were a part of some type of military intelligence program. And if you watch something like Mindhunter on Netflix, have you seen it?
Yes, I have actually, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so if anybody out there hasn't seen it, it's basically this FBI task force that they go around and they interview serial killers and try to figure out what's going on in the mind of a serial killer so they could better understand them. And the main theme in this show is that these serial killers are an outgrowth of a sick society. So we have a sick society, so people are becoming more sick and they're acting out that sickness in these murderous ways. And that's kind of like that's really just messes with your mind if you really understand the nuts and bolts of this whole thing. So you have a military intelligence program that is, either MK Ultraing people into murdering people or murdering people and blaming a patsy. And then later on they get, Netflix to do a series on how these serial killers are an outgrowth of a sick society, so we need better FBI agents and better police to deal with these and better laws. And so it's really like it's a really great example of a really good MK Ultra program that's, they get the front end and the back end really taking care of it. And I was a huge fan of Dave McGowan's book, Scenes in Laurel Canyon, the book that you just mentioned. I actually have an autographed copy of his.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was trying to track him down to try to get him on the show recently, and I learned that he passed.
He died, yeah.
Yeah, that was sad.
Yeah. Very original thinker, Dave McGowan. I would strongly recommend that anybody trying to understand the direction that America took after 1968, well worth reading, particularly the Strange Things in Laurel Canyon book. That was really, he cobbled that together. It was originally a whole series of blog posts, and he finally put it together as a book. And he did so as a man who was very clear that he came from a left-wing background and loved the music of that time and the people involved and so on, and but found that there were some very, very odd questions surrounding many of the deaths of the people involved in that Laurel Canyon movement, if you could call it that, the music movement from about, what do you say? There was 3 phases of it, wasn't it? It was sort of like from the Byrds led the one, you go into a second phase as Neil Young and people like that join in, and it kind of ends up with the Eagles, where it's refined into what then becomes the preserve of Geffen, Geffen Records and this sort of thing, and the advent of what they would call the Velvet Mafia. But it's such an interesting take on how something that seems to be organic in nature could actually, you can make a case for it as being a manipulated, guided, series of events, processes that formulated a strong influence in our culture that has one thing in mind, and that is that we all become more susceptible to accepting government control over our lives.
And I have a hard time breaching the subject to people, that maybe some of their favorite bands were, part of a CIA operation to guide the counterculture and to keep them away from maybe more of the anti-war spiritual movement that it was supposed to be, and shove it into more of a corner of the drugstore, and it's kind of easy to point out too. I mean, so you've got just in the Doors, you've got Jim Morrison, whose father was the admiral of the ship that was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Yeah. That was it's demonstrably a false flag event. I
didn't know that until Dave McGowan had written about that. I had no idea. Yeah.
And then Miles Copeland's father not only is a CIA agent, but he's written books as a CIA agent. Cloak and Dagger. I have it on my shelf. I've thumbed through it and I've read some of the chapters, and it's just. It's sympathetic to the CIA, of course, because he was an agent himself. And then you've got Mama Cass's father was naval intelligence, and then you've got Frank Zappa's father was he was one of the head honchos at the Army Chemical Engineer Corps. You know what I mean? So it's like, and it's not even just one of them. It's crazy because it's all of them.
Yeah, all in one particular group, all arriving at the same time. And so on, and almost being given the equipment, the recording studios, and all that sort of. And of course, we know about the Wrecking Crew doing most of their music and such. And it didn't matter that they couldn't really play their own songs to that standard because everybody was so drugged out in the original, days of the Laurel Canyon scene. Through free LSD and such being put into it, that nobody cared about the quality of the music. Everybody just got high and had a good time. It's there are things that McGowan points out that are beyond coincidence. They just cannot be coincidences. It's a planned. The true anti-war thing was happening up in San Francisco. And then it sort of happens that. And I think the listeners have to be aware of the fact that Dave McGowan centers it around this particular facility at the top of Laurel Canyon that was a film studio and was probably one of the most advanced film studios of its time. It was later used to, make all the propaganda films for atomic bombs and various other military ventures and so on. I think who owns that now? Some Jared Leto?
I did not know that. I did not know that.
He's bought it and so on.
But it's also where Disney made all of their War Bond movies with Donald Duck.
Yes.
That's where they did all those animations.
Yeah. And so you got this giant facility that is at the center of this, basically this media campaign to change the way Americans, view music and how bands work and so on. It's just the most interesting story, but also a hell of a wake-up call to how music has been used, as part of, like a giant MK Ultra experiment. Go to Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, and sort of you see how that's explored, from the book. A Clockwork Orange, who was it? Burgess? I can't remember. Yeah, who wrote the book Clockwork Orange? They explore the use of media to brainwash the principal character, in the film, played by Malcolm McDowell. And there you've got film and music sort of being combined. Laurel Canyon, what Dave McGowan seems to be hinting at, was like exactly that process, but played out at a national level.
Yeah, and like I was saying too, I always have a hard time broaching that particular subject with people because they have such a visceral reaction to it. Like, are you insinuating that my favorite bands, the bands I grew up on, were a part of an intelligence operation? And it's like, well, yeah. And it's not even that crazy because, so Crazy Bones, he is a rapper that was a part of Bone Thugs and Harmony. It was a very popular hip-hop group in the mid to late 90s. He came out pretty recently with a prepared statement that I forget what radio show he was on, but he basically said that back in the day, back in the early 90s, I was taken into a room with my fellow bandmates and a bunch of other artists, and we were told by these record execs that they wanted to give us all the money we ever wanted, but we had to promote drug and gang culture in our songs because we want to fill the prisons. We all own private prisons, and we want to make sure that they stay full. And a couple of them had walked out because they were so disgusted by it, and of course, everybody else stayed. But on their way out, they basically said, "Hey, you remember those NDAs that you signed? Well, if you don't." If you don't honor the contract, we will just kill you. So have a good day, But that's just a modern example, and of course, gangster rap is a very easy example to make. It's tough to make the case if someone is unfamiliar with the details and maybe the inner workings of it, from those bands out of Laurel Canyon, because it was all peace and love, and maybe there was some esoteric stuff and stuff like that. Yeah. Gangster rap is an easy one.
Yeah. I think the gloves sort of are pulled off with that. They're just no longer. When I was sort of growing up, there'd be all these Christian attempts at sort of associating rock with Satan worship, devil worship, this sort of thing, and there was a lot of talk about backmasking and all the sort of reverse play of the record has secret hidden messages from the devil and so on like that, and. When I sort of grew up, it occurred to me that if somebody wants to sing that the devil's a great guy and he's my Lord and Savior and all this kind of stuff, you can do it. You don't have to backmask it anymore. It's just not a problem to do that. And I remember Jimmy Page from Zeppelin saying that it's hard enough writing the music forwards, let alone composing something backwards in the music and such like that. So we had all of that sort of thinking that was going on from the early days. Yes, I can see how it's progressed over time, and in gangster rap it's become just overt. But even back in the 70s, if you wanted to sing a song about the devil, the Rolling Stones' "Sympathy for the Devil" is a case in point. When was that? 68, something like that. It's sort of one of those songs that kicked off that era. So. Yeah, they've kind of they're no longer, in terms of that kind of behavior, they're no longer trying to hide it. What we're now seeing, I believe, that is being pushed is the move towards pedophilia and bestiality as the normalization of those two taboos in society. And you'll see more and more things go on as they do. You'll see more and more artists start to sing about marrying their cat or sort of taking their horse out for a date, or so, and the pedophilic sort of themes that are starting to come through, where people are just trying to say that pedophilia is simply part of the spectrum of sexuality. We will arrive at that point where, it would be considered worth cancelling you over to suggest that somebody behaving in a pedophile way, that there's something wrong with that.
That's why I was originally taken off of YouTube, is because I was criticizing pedophilia. It was the craziest thing. They said I was cyberbullying and harassing. And, I was just speaking with somebody about this the other day. I was like, have you ever seen Cuties on Netflix? And they're like, no, what about that? Because we were talking about pedophilia. That was the craziest thing. And I didn't actually see it, but I only had read about it just because I didn't think I could stomach it. But I had seen, short clips and things like that. And the fact that it was sponsored on Netflix, it was a French film, or a French television series, and Netflix is they're on their board is the Obamas, and and the fact that there's this push within the movement to reclassify them and call them MAPs, minor attractive persons. It's it's super sickening, and there is a visceral reaction to anybody that is a regular ass person. But what's happening is that in this like ultra woke cultural kind of like overhaul that's going on right now, they try it out every few months to see if it kind of sticks or not, but in many cases it doesn't, but they seem to gain a little bit more ground with it every kind of time they try to trot it out. And I think that's really just to cover up all of the stuff that is going to come out or was about to come out with regard to the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And even worse than that. Yep. When Harvey Weinstein was sort of put out and such, that came out about his, behavior in Hollywood and so on. I always felt that he was their sacrificial lamb to push away the scrutiny of the more, pedophile-based abuse that was going on in Hollywood. Because when you look at Harvey Weinstein and so on, his behavior of rape seems to be concentrated on adult women and such. There's never been any indication that he ever got underage girls or was involved in that sort of thing. He got put away for doing rape, and rightly so. That's the end of him. But I always felt that he was a sacrificial lamb, because if you really look at what's been going on in Hollywood, pedophile abuse seems to be at the core of so much of what has been coming out. And because it seems like it is going to be coming out, and various people who study this kind of thing, who have been involved, say we haven't seen the half of it. Yes, it would be good to get out in front by trying to soften the blow so that people have a sympathetic response to, hey, did you know such and such in Hollywood was actually doing this with little boys? It's all I can say is that it's so accelerated at the moment that I think it's actually got out of control. It's, these things have to be done on a very gradual basis to have a true effect over time. But now it's like they're on this mad rush to get it all jammed down our throats. And I think that's simply because so much is going to come out and is going to affect people who are sacred cows in whatever field they're in. That that the shock is going to be exactly that. But they're trying. They're trying to soften the idea that a pedophile is really just another human expression, a form of human sexual expression.
Yeah, you get the you get the argument like, well, the Greeks and Romans were into it, and it was a big part of Persian culture, and what's kind of left out is that's really more of a signal of when a culture is becoming decadent and when it's nearing the end of its life cycle.
Precisely.
Like Catholicism as an institution. Not necessarily like Catholicism, the practice, but the institution. And that's where I base a lot of my criticisms on. It's like all institutions, they go off the rails pretty quickly. And when they try to, when something starts off as a social instrument, which is something that's useful for society, but then that institution starts to grow and becomes a staple, and then it tries to monopolize its position, and then it tries to entrench itself, and then it does become entrenched until and then it can do no wrong in terms of what it can get away with. And so And that's really like where obviously the American empire is at, all of our institutions. And it's like we face a problem worldwide now. We face a problem with these immense institutions that have gotten way too much power, and they have they're working together. I don't think you've really ever seen this kind, like the military and the state may have worked together before, but you didn't have all of these industries. At least these industries in times past, they used to compete with each other for some type of influence. Like you used to have the merchants fighting with the bankers, fighting with the state, fighting with the religious, with the whatever the religious institution was. Now they're all working together, and that's actually some scary stuff. And it's the linkage, I think, is really that trauma-based mind control. It's the ability of the center of it all being the media industrial complex. It's the media that is able to keep criticism of these institutions at bay because of the trauma that all these institutions are inflicting upon people.
Yeah, they call it controlling the narrative, and the narrative that has been the strongest part of the narrative is that we all need to be guided. As I say, I think is it this 7 or 6 words, well, the government should do something about it. In this country where I live, the UK, something goes wrong. Well, the government should do something about it. It's a natural response that people have come to. People cannot conceive almost of humanity coming into existence without a government licensing act. Or something that guides people to do the only thing that they're allowed to do. Collectivism has always been the problem here. That ideology, which becomes communism or socialism, that sounds great. Sounds wonderful that everybody has an equal share and a chance and so on along those lines in society. But ultimately, collectivism leads to monopolization by the state. And if you are the bureaucrat who is in control of the state, you bag it all. You create an elite of bureaucrats. And I think America is suffering now from their bureaucratic institutions having become all powerful. I think that's what you're seeing with your COVID problem now, where, who do you see more of on your airways these days in terms of telling the nation what it should do? Dr. Fauci or Joe Biden? I think you see more of Dr. Fauci now telling you how you should live your life. And these are non-elected people working for the government. And it is so much the antithesis of what was established by the American Revolution that it's one of the great tragedies that many American people have succumbed to, like many other people in the world, where they look to government for guidance. They don't look to government as a way of influencing, right and wrong through the power of the people, the words of the people. They look to government as the mechanism by which the people are told what to think.
And I always ask people, I'm like, why do you think the government should do something about this particular thing? Can you name me anything that they've done right? Just name one. I'll wait, And it's really a fault of the educational institution, because the education institution, even from its inception, was created to make workers that didn't think too much and were willing to give up their kids, to kind of perpetuate the system, but basically just to make sure that they could run the machines and not gripe too much about working conditions and pay and things like that. Yeah. And then always have like a steam valve, let out a little bit of pressure if oh my God, well, they want better working hours. All right, fine. 40 hours, fine. They don't have to do 60. We'll give them 40, and things of that nature. But it's the educational institutions that have convinced people through this idea of great man theory and maybe like somehow convincing them that government is a paternalist figure, is a father, is a man, and that
only has your best interests at heart.
Yeah. When has that ever been the case? No.
No. The body count's too high.
Way too high.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and I've been struggling with this because I've been trying to like really wrap my mind around like, okay, what percentage of the population really truly buys this crap? Because it's like, I mean, I see people that buy it hook, line, and sinker. I see people that are like, I'm not too sure about it, but just to be safe, I'm gonna go along with it. I know so many people that they refused to get the vaccine until the last minute because they were absolutely forced to, or at least felt like they were forced to and didn't think they had a way out, and that like regretted it and only did it, just to be able to travel or just to be able to stay on good terms with their employer, and don't actually want anybody else to be forced into it. That like they don't think that other people should be forced to take it. They just took it. It's their own personal choice, and they see it as a personal choice. So it's like I see that enough to make me wonder, like, how did it get here, and what amount of people are actually buying all this stuff? And like I said, I really think it's a fault of the educational institution for making people think, because history, the way that history is written, was tailored to fit this narrative in the early 20th century. It was the Carnegie Endowment they figured out that they needed to change the way that American history specifically was written, because they had certain agendas they were trying to pursue. One of them being, a one world government, and they figured out that war and education were the two best ways to get that done. And so they created their own stable of historians, because they found out that the historians of the day would not go along with it. They sent out some feelers and tried to get some people on board, and they just were not down with it. And so they decided to create their own stable of historians working with the Rhodes Scholarship Program. That's how they were able to change the way that American history was written.
Very much so. Throughout the English-speaking world, and even in the European, the French, German worlds, in the Italian worlds, the same thing has sort of happened, where you get this revisionist approach to a lot of history that suits the idea of we're marching towards, a world government. Wouldn't it be better if we were all ruled from one central place on the planet? There is no doubt that just by its own term, central banking has been the mechanism by which that has been financed through. The fact that by having a central bank, you have to tax the nation to pay the interest. And then that taxed money is then paying the interest, but it also goes into funding these, what I would call rogue educational programs. It's there for anybody who wants to go and study, to see how that has taken place, why it's taken place. It's another story whether you agree with it or disagree with it. And, hopefully it's programs like this that give people just a hint that there's an alternative way of looking at what's going on within the country. And, just taking more way back to MK Ultra and such, it's those kinds of insights. Hey, maybe serial killing is not necessarily just some guy going off the deep end because of his warped sexual fantasies or whatever. That maybe there's an organized element to it. You can apply the same thing to the assassination of Kennedy. Did Lee Harvey Oswald act alone, or was there a plan behind the scenes? I was ambivalent to it until I saw that footage with those Secret Service guys. As they're, how they used to run along the thing. You've seen that thing where they're told come back, and you can see them, they go, "What the hell? Why?
Yeah.
What?"
They throw their arms up. They're like, what's going on?
What are we doing? Mm-hmm. And so something had to be going on there. And I don't care what anybody says. Lee Harvey Oswald was not the shooter to pull off that shot. There is no shooter that can pull off that shot. And so the idea that, well, it just reminds me of that Franklin Delano Roosevelt saying, if it happened that way, you can bet that it was planned to happen that way, and, you can say that a lot about, what has happened in American society. And as far as Roosevelt goes, he almost, in a way, kind of admitted that Pearl Harbor was allowed to happen.
Yeah. And I was always blown away by the fact that they had an inquiry, a hearing, and they were trying to court-martial the admiral that was in charge of the placement of ships, because they were told to clear the sea lanes and just they basically allowed the all the Japanese airplanes to come in unmolested. So. One thing I was thinking about, so we're talking about MK Ultra in the context of serial killers. Could you kind of like get down into the details with one of these, maybe like your favorite, or the one you know the most about, and how are they tied with an intelligence operation? What are some of the details that could kind of flesh one of those stories out?
There are two stories. Serial killing is not a new phenomenon. You go back to Jack the Ripper, and so on here in the UK and such, and the guy who ran the castle in Chicago. What's his name? Holmes. They don't know how many people he knocked off in his little chamber of horrors there. I think that was the 1880s or something. I can't remember exactly what time, but for me, the one where the cat nearly got let out the bag is the Manson killings. And what you see there are all the hallmarks of serial killing that would happen later, but an obvious organized approach to it. The Manson family was an organized unit that was headed by a guy who undoubtedly had been involved in some form of MK Ultra research. When he was in prison, he was part of that whole LSD treatment that they were doing. People like Whitey Bulger, the Boston gangster. He was also, I say it sort of, for want of a better term, a victim of this type thing. But they signed up for this kind of drug stuff, and we can see that that Charles Manson seems to have almost been groomed through certain experiments and so on like that to be who he became. And he starts off this family idea, and Manson always said, "I never killed anybody." When it came to the Tate LaBianca killings, but it was his group of people who were involved in that. And then you've got to ask yourself, how were they sustained? What was it that sustained their existence as a group and such? But those killings showed an organized element, a group of people who were programmed to go into that killing frenzy and despite the fact that the LaBianca killings were a case of mistaken identity. What do they call it? Little Armenia? That's where in California where the LaBianca killings happened. Manson pointed up to a house, said, "Go up there." They went up the driveway and they got the wrong house and proceeded to kill a middle-aged couple that had no connection whatsoever to what was going on with whatever the Manson family were sort of involved with, which obviously had a lot to do with the drug trade and so on. But that story initially pointed to organized killing as the act of it, and you could say that the Manson killings is the craziness that then hit the United States after the Manson killings. The rise of the serial killer comes out of that time, and what I started to look at was sort of the latter serial killers after Manson. And there were two people in particular. There was a guy called Dean Kroll, who was a homosexual serial killer in Houston, Texas, and a guy called John Wayne Gacy, who was a homosexual serial killer up in Chicago. And I started to realize that there was a conduit of trafficking between Houston and Chicago, where the interstate system and so on, that seems to almost be like, you could call it the serial killer highway, in terms of all of these killings and works that these serial killers have been found to exist since that time. Dean Kroll was ex-army, whereas John Wayne Gacy was connected politically. He was a guy who worked very heavily within the Democratic culture and so on like that. Now, Dean Kroll was killed by his buddies, all right, in terms of the in terms of all the killings that he'd had these two teenage boys working with him, supposedly, and they turned on each other and they ended up killing him because they feared for their life, so to speak. One of them is still alive in the prison system, sort of working today. But there you see it again, that we're talking about a gang working. Yet if you go and study Dean Kroll, it's like Dean Kroll, the serial killer, the lone madman, and these guys. John Wayne Gacy absolutely claimed that he was part of a network. All right. He to his dying day, he said, he claimed that some of the killings, it wasn't even him. He was just, had to get rid of the bodies that other people had been involved with and so on. But he claimed that there was a network of which he was involved in, and that, this network preyed on young boys, and that this network had a sort of a trafficking line between Chicago and Houston, where Houston becomes almost if I were to pick one town in the United States that is a center of sex trafficking, and particularly sex trafficking that results in often the murder of people involved in that, it would be the town of Houston, city of Houston in Texas. And it is from there in Houston that you find that you get a whole lot of other serial killers that all follow a similar pattern to the Dean Kroll modus of operandi, as they would like to call it. And even to this day, we have the Texas killing fields, which is the preying of young girls in this case. But nonetheless, Houston is a center of that. And it's these connections that you get into the military with Dean Kroll and into the political elite with John Wayne Gacy that I think highlight this feature that there are networks in operation that these people work as procurers for, and are allowed to indulge whatever they do at as a side option. But they are procurers, because that's what the Dean Kroll thing was. They were procurers for a group of people who like to have sex with young boys. And John Wayne Gacy claimed the same thing. Now shift over to Belgium. And for me, the one that really, really brings down the hammer on this idea of there being what, I can't remember his name now, an author calls it the pedocracy. This idea that there is an aristocracy of pedophilia that controls things around the world. And there's the Marc Dutroux killings. Now, Marc Dutroux is a particularly awful guy. He used to go into Central Europe, into Eastern Europe, and he'd pick up young girls and he'd keep them in a dungeon at his home. And when he was arrested for car theft or whatever, he let two of these girls starve to death because he went into jail for something like 7 weeks. And rather than telling them, I've got a couple of girls, he just let them starve to death. And these were the two girls that were found, and he was put on trial and charged with their murder, and then it all came out. And Marc Dutroux has always claimed that he is simply a procurer for a higher up network of people involved in the European political elite. And if anybody wants to study a nation that is plagued by pedocracy and pedophilic murder and so on like that, study what's happened to the country of Belgium. Those people have come out in mass for the things that have been happening that they found out as a result of the Dutroux affair, and the people who were involved in that, high court judges, major business magnates, people involved in the entertainment industry and so on. All right. They came out in mass. I think they had some protests, 500,000 of them. The fire department came out and sprayed white paint over the judiciary in Brussels as a mass protest. At the time, hardly anybody covered this in the news. The Belgian people had a gutsful, but of course the anger rose. They let it play down, and all the guys that Dutroux named walked. Not one of them were investigated. They just went off into quiet lives in other areas. Dutroux was put in prison, and to this day he claims that he was just part of a machine that provided children for certain tastes and derelictions that these pedophile type people have. So it's those cases that for me stood out, that showed that there was an organized element to all this. You probably heard of Madeleine McCann, the young British girl that went missing in Portugal. World news all around the place. I mean, this stuff happens all the time around the world, but for some reason, Madeleine McCann became a focus of attention. All right, as far as disappearing children go. And I can remember when that happened, I was living in Budapest in Hungary, which was the center of the hardcore pornography industry out of Europe. Virtually all of your hardcore porn queens came out of Hungary at that time, or Czechoslovakia. And so because I worked in the film world, in the film industry at the time and such, I was aware of all of these, this underworld of filmmaking that goes on in Hungary. And, Hungary being sort of the spiritual home of, of vampires and all this sort of stuff. And that it was almost strange that you had this this nefarious sort of connection to pornography and the corrupting of all these women that came through that industry. It was in your face if you worked in the in anything to do with photography or camera work and so on. And the Madeleine McCann thing came out while I was there. And I remembered very, very clearly that Portugal had this pedophile ring bust where an orphanage was used for simply getting children into the hands of pedophiles, politicians, and television stars, celebrities of note. They had a major scandal in Portugal over that, and it sort of it occurred at the time. I thought, well, Madeleine McCann has become the victim of that, because that was organized as well. In terms of the pedophile industry down there. So, it remains to be seen what happened with Madeleine McCann. Because the parents are alive at this stage, I'm not willing to put my own sort of ideas as to what actually happened, because I don't know exactly what happened. But there is this industry in Europe of exploiting children. For whether it is pornography or straightforward sex industry, or if it's for illegal adoption, this sort of thing. And it is an industry that it's facilitated by authorities who are willing to look the other way, or who are simply compromised by the very same thing. And I think it would be pretty much the same in the United States if it were really looked into.
Yeah, the one interesting kind of aspect of the Madeleine McCann story is that the sketches of there was some the sketches look a lot like the Podestas, and consequently enough, they were in Portugal, like right around the corner at the time. But that's all. That's all. Who knows? But I wonder if all of these networks operate as singular nodes to a larger network, like a worldwide network. And if so, what do you think the purpose of it is? Do you think it serves some kind of larger purpose? Like, is it just a great blackmailing ring, or is it just sheer pleasure, or a mixture, or is it something deeper?
A mixture, which is taken advantage of by a very high up, you couldn't even say high up, but a very distorted form of occultist that can tap that resource at will. All right. So, pedophilia, I think most people are aware that rape and domination of an unwilling person is an act of power rather than a sexual pleasure. It's often brought about because that person wants to feel dominant over whatever they're not able to feel dominance in their life. It's a projection of some kind to make themselves feel better about themselves, that they perpetrate this on people who are defenseless, children being the most defenseless in our society. I do, however, when I first started this, I used to look at the amount of children in the United States that go missing, and I came across various figures: 500,000, 700,000, and I talked to a guy I know who worked in customs in New Zealand about and he worked closely with the police down there. I said, what's the story about all these people missing and so on? And he came back and he said, most of them you can get a child that can run away, every other weekend. And every time they run away, that's once added to the list. So you can get children that can run away, 50 times in a year. And that's 50 missing children cases and so on. So that's how that figure can be inflated. So what I did was I decided to do an experiment and find out if we did 1,000th of a 100th of a percentage of the figure they're giving us, maybe we'd get a figure that might tell us how many kids are actually being kidnapped for nefarious reasons. And the figure that I got was enough to say that there was literally one child a day in America that would be going missing for these reasons. And that's just a statistical analysis that you can use without any proof that has actually happened. But the fact that you do find out that children are actually, there are plenty of cases where children have been found in these shocking conditions, where they've been pimped out. Many of them have grown into teenagers and become part of the process later in life when they become too old for the pedophiles and so on. So it occurred to me that even if you have that, you've got, even if it's just one child per week being taken for this kind of thing, then you've got 52 kids in a year that are going missing into this type of activity. And the evidence for ritualistic murder is there for anybody to see in terms of the small amount of victims that we have uncovered. Here in London, they found torsos of children floating in the River Thames. They have obviously been victims of some sort of ritual activity, often to do with sort of African versions of the juju religions that they have down in Nigeria and so on. And I would also go as far as to say that the way that Fred West, the serial killer from what's the name of that place down there? Not Bristol, but I want to say Colchester, but it's not Colchester. But anyway, where Fred West came from was targeting young girls, but it seems like he was also doing it as a way of making money, pushing in snuff pornography, that kind of stuff in for people to watch, doing stuff to order. That kind of thing seems to be what he may have been involved in. And that makes it, I believe, conclusive that there is at least a very, very small percentage of missing children who end up in ritualized murder for the purposes of people who have occult beliefs that require this resource. And the whole trafficking industry in terms of sex from ancient times and so on is that resource that they can dip into and put an order in to get what they need to perform whatever ritual it is that they think is required to be successful in whatever endeavor they're involved in.
And I'm sure it's lucrative too. It's got to be lucrative as all hell. Yeah, and it's like, it's not even that crazy because, I mean, even take a look at something like the ritualistic murders of Carthage, right? Like you had to sacrifice your firstborn to the state. They used to have in one of their they used to have these little coffins in one of their public. It was something like a coliseum, their arena.
They
had
a necropolis, especially for the child deaths. Yeah.
Which is crazy. If you really want to stunt the growth of your particular, civilization or your state, do that. Why would you even do that? That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. We did sort of discuss this idea that in so doing, you supposedly ensure yourself a better life to be reincarnated back into. The idea that if you get the blood sex magic right, you can guarantee that you stay within an elite family, or you can be born into an elite family in your next cycle. It comes back down to that idea. So it's a horrible distortion of the reincarnation idea. All right, that you can influence what drives the whole cycle of reincarnation to put you into so-called better families, more elite families, to maintain yourself in elite families, and so on. And that was the big breakthrough that I had when I read Peter Mark Adams' book, Game of Saturn, where he was able to show that there is this idea of, you're not working to the life that you have today. You're working to the life that you come back in, and you're trying to influence that, and you're trying to climb up the ladder to get higher and higher. It's a distortion, I believe, of Buddhist principles of reincarnation. I myself am, in my own faith, I'm a resurrectionist. I'm not somebody who believes in reincarnation, but the Buddhist concept of reincarnation, I think, has been distorted horribly in terms of people looking for a way. So it's a little bit like, in Christianity, where you get this sort of prosperity gospel idea. If I tithe to the Lord will make me rich. This idea that you're only doing what you're doing to get ahead in the world today, and such, that permeates through most religious. We can't help it. We're all carnal thinkers. We all want to do better in the material world that we're in. And some people look to religious ritual and things like that, superstition, whatever, to facilitate that. The extreme end being what we're discussing. So it's unfortunate, but if you're rich enough, look, why did the Clintons have just such a massive interest in Haiti after the thing down there where they have that form of voodoo down there that is involved in all ways of trying to influence the spiritual world for your own benefit, and such, and they seem to be very much enamored with that part of the world in terms of their endeavors. I think a lot's going to come out from Haiti in terms of, the way they've dipped into that kind of thinking.
Mm. And I also saw it as opportunistic because of since all the earthquakes and, you have a very unstable government. It was an unstable government to begin with, became even more unstable because of the natural disaster. And then furthermore, you have the opportunity there where it's a good photo op. You go down there, you get your foundation to go donate, blankets, and you steal some children on the way out. No one would be any of the wiser. And I mean, a lot of aspects came into play there all at the same time that made that a good opportunity. So, yeah. And, so Troy, I think we could wrap it up there. This was a fascinating conversation as always, man. I love having you on. Not only do I always learn a lot, but I get to, sometimes I'm reading your book and I'm like, it's actually incredible that I get to ask an author, to go more into a subject but you've become one of my favorite people to interview. So we're going to keep this thing going.
Jay, the pleasure's all mine.
And, where can everybody find your stuff?
Well, I've got a website called SaturnDeathCult.com. You can basically get the full gist of everything that I talk about in relation to Saturn theory and its geopolitical, socioeconomic implications. There is a Kindle version which goes into even more detail that you can buy from Amazon. If you buy that helps keep the website going. But that's the place to start, the website. Go and have a look, and there's links to where the book can be bought. Unfortunately, it's only on Kindle because making a full color book is far too expensive, even today. And it is the color images that you need to be able to understand the significance of Saturn theory and its influence on the world religions and the march through history. But take a look there and go from there to Amazon if you want to buy the book and help me keep the website going.
All right. Once again, thanks so much for coming on, Troy. Really was a pleasure.